Well, hi everyone. This is the second in what I'm hoping is a long series of interviews with experts, and I've got Victor with me today. Victor and I have had multiple different conversations around this wonderful evolving world of geospatial. Today, Victor and I are going to talk about integration, system integration. It kind of ties into what I was talking to Scott about in our last how bringing systems together, particularly tied together by spatial, has enormous value, and that Victor's an expert in that area. So we'll go around the houses a little bit before we get into the full integration piece, because I wanted to ask Victor some other questions from our other conversations. But to get things started, Victor, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Matt. So my name is Victor Alessia. I work currently as a lead solution consultant for a company called OpenText. OpenText is one of the world's largest companies that's focused on enterprise information management. And so, I do help mainly around integrating multiple enterprise supply chains and global value chains so that the products or goods and services people need or rely on, are optimally kind of produced and delivered to them. So that's done through technology, and that technology involves integrating information systems, data, infrastructure, things like cloud, integrating platforms. And then so that's doing that. To get to what I currently do now, I've had a varied career mainly around systems architecture, systems engineering, starting from working in oil and gas, doing environmental management systems, environmental impact assessment systems, geospatial information systems. They moved into risk management, logistics, planning systems, and then moved into town planning for over 10 years and town management, dealing with town planning systems and also highway asset management systems. And then kind of moved into working around enterprise architecture, which is just like actually looking at the larger scale of architecting and delivering enterprise systems to enable large organizations, companies achieve their missions, whether it could be managing a city, it could be keeping an infrastructure in the best state to deliver value to its users and customers and stakeholders. And then after years of working doing that, I was doing a lot of work around enterprise solutions architecture and designing solutions at the solutions level, but also making sure that those solutions deliver the enterprise missions, enterprise objectives. So I do work a lot with enterprise architects and CIOs or clients to enable them, to deliver the capabilities that they require to operate their businesses optimally and efficiently and effectively to deliver value. So that's what I do on a day-to-day basis, and you have to use the customers, be a trusted advisor, and that people can rely on to get their businesses running to the best possible standard.
And before we dive into the details, Victor, where are you based?
I'm based in London, based out of London, United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Victor's.
I left England years ago, but Victor and I know exactly where Victor lives because I was born just north of. Well, I wasn't born in London, but I went to London University. So yeah, I'm calling home when I talk to you. Well, where's home for me now? It's kind of two places anyway. So that's good to know. So let's dive in a little bit deeper. So one thing I wanted to start with, and it's slightly off topic, but I still want to tie everything to integration, is we spoke when we first got together around this whole notion of people diving in feet first into providing solutions. So, they have ideation sessions, they build things and hope people will come. And we kind of went around and really broke out the importance of finding the problem first. Just expand on that conversation.
I think that's from my experience, I've seen that's maybe out of the agile movement, people took maybe it's a little bit very literal. Actually, fail first, you go straight to minimum viable product. So you come up with an idea, maybe a great idea, and so people had that concept that you just dive straight into the thing and take it to markets, and somebody who really wants that solution that you've provided. But oftentimes, speaking to customers, I've been experienced, have experience of working with partners or certain types of companies, usually startups, where the customer will ask, but why? If this is a solution, what is the problem it's solving? And so as a systems engineer, as a systems architect, it's based on capability based, but what is the capability gap that you're trying to fill? What's the gap in the customer? What the customer, or who you want to sell this to, the customer, the industry, the potential users of this solution. What is the gap that they may know or they may not know intrinsically? What are you trying to fill? And then from that gap, you try to say, okay, there's a space here, there's a risk. If the customer has no solution, sometimes customers have problems, but they're willing to actually risk no solution and go on, as usual. Or is the solution more expensive than, which is what we in value engineering, is the solution more expensive than actually the problem is trying to solve? In that case, it's not viable as a solution. So you find that people just start from the idea, get to solve a problem, but things like analyzing what's the business value of this as well, means that people go to market, and then the market is the truth. The market is the final arbiter. Market tells you, oh no, this is not a viable solution, and somebody's not going to pay for it. And I've seen a lot of large businesses, small startups, they go on a solution. Typically, it's usually a solution based around the buzz, or it's a blockchain solution, or it's a big data solution, but actually maybe a peer-to-peer network that's not a blockchain, that's managed by somebody, will solve the problem, will do the job. And so I've seen large companies do such solutions, and it doesn't work, and then everybody walks away from it. Actually, looking at the solution and improving it may make it work in the next iteration, but typically, some companies just write it off. I failed, I'm not looking again. And actually a lot of solutions that could be viable if people looked at it, tweaked it, listened to the market a bit more, and went again, would be successful. If they did that, people just write that off and start again and make the same mistakes. Fortunately, certain things succeed, and maybe some people succeed and people think, well, I failed many times and that's why it worked. But oftentimes you probably don't need to fail many times to get things work.
It feels to me, I'm big on sort of frameworks and evolving into that place. And again, too often people kind of do it in an arbitrary way. They think they found something, let's go after it. They don't really go through this process of validation and discovery. But what I was going to ask you there was, finding the problem is arguably the most difficult thing. I'm not going to lessen the importance of the technology, but finding the problem is often really difficult, and not all customers know the problem. So you said teasing out the problem. How do you tease out a problem?
So typically, it's systems engineering. We call it a moment of truth. Usually a customer will be doing certain things, or somebody will be, doing their job every day, and there is a moment where, oh, I wish there was something to do this better, or I wish we could have done this faster, or I wish we could have achieved this before the deadline, or I wish we could have done it differently. And that moment of truth is something that anybody, it could be a customer or an individual, will have. And I wish I had a phone that could do this, or I wish I could have had a phone that could take just a bit more photos. So customers know that moment of truth when they have it. And so it's about teasing, trying to find that moment of truth as a systems engineer or a business analyst, or somebody's trying to understand the customer's pain. And once you find that moment of truth, then you then validate it. Okay, yeah, that means that the customer probably has a gap in capability that needs to be satisfied. But okay, then goes down to the value engineering piece. if I'm able to solve this, is the solution more expensive than the problem? Because if the solution is more expensive than the problem, then you don't have a solution that's viable. So then you go through that piece of value engineering, and that's when you start, going down to the first principles. Okay, I've got a solution, but what do I do to make this solution viable? So people like the 𝐒𝐲𝐚𝐿 of this world that have a background in economics and engineering, that's where they thrive in that. They find a way to get the value engineer, not just also as part of systems engineering, to get a viable solution. And when you have a viable solution, you go to the customer, you have something that's within the price that the customer is wants to pay for, and that also solves the problem. And then you're in business at that. Then you can now start rolling out and scaling out and marketing, and that's how companies then grow.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It kind of tends to tingle down my spine when you say that, because I've seen people jumping so quickly. I've got to get to revenue. We've got to build something quickly because and too often it fails, and because it's not been this methodical due diligence, interaction closely with customers, all of that. It seems to miss. People are moving too quickly. Let's just move topics slightly, but on the same thread. You and I have spoken about dot connection, and I think where we're going with integration is connecting dots, which is system dots, and we'll talk about that in a second. But one part of the conversation that we had together was geographers, and 𝐒𝐲𝐚𝐿, I'm gonna make sure he listens to this, because he works for Esri, and he's a passionate geographer, and he's always talking about the importance of geographers. And I've often thought geographers are seen as, well, too often we're seen as map makers in today's digital world, which I think's wrong. And too often we know all the capitals of the world. It's like, what is a geographer? Well, I think a geographer is the ultimate dot connector. I think we're able to look 1,000 foot up and then go down into the details. But we always start at that higher level and think about those pieces. And you and I had that conversation about the value of thinking in that sort of dot connecty way, and how geographers particularly are very skilled at dot connecting. Just expand on that conversation that we had. And your thoughts?
So that's my understanding. When I did geography, I used to have lots of friends that did philosophy at uni, and my first degree was in geography. And one thing I always felt that geography, every course ended with systems, climatic systems, environmental systems, geomorphological systems, geological systems, regional climate systems. And so immediately I realized something that, different layers and different things, transportation system, the actual world is an ecosystem. The world, the universe is a system itself, and geographers, the way we learn, and the skills we have is that geography helps you actually understand the actual reality, and the actual reality of living in a world that's a three-dimensional universe, but actually in sometimes trying to represent a three-dimensional universe. Like we can represent a whole city, which maybe is technically four dimensional, but we could represent it as a dot, a zero-dimensional universe that you go in, and then there's an event horizon that takes you to another universe, a building, a shopping complex, with thousands of other objects. We could reduce a building into just a two-dimensional map that you see, but you can still recognize that universe, even though the building has flaws and it has things in it. But geographers at a different level, we know how to represent the world in the way people don't understand it, but knowing actually what is real, what to generalize, what to leave out, what to show people. And that comes out in map making, because map making is the act of the science of what am I making this map for? What do they want it for? What do they want to see, and what will they understand? And the map is just a representation of data as information or knowledge. So geographers will have that system thinking, but we also have understand that fundamental reality, of space, until we start living in a universe where time and space doesn't apply, probably the 6th or 7th dimension or 5th dimension. Geographers would always be the people that understand that 3, 0, 1, 2, 3-dimensional, 4 dimensions of space and time. And and a lot of geographers don't just stop on Earth. If you think about cosmography, geography of the universe as well. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
essential. Most of us don't know we have it, but as you grow in your profession and see other things, you can realize, oh, I'm able to understand, even in designing information systems, typically, that actually information systems are typically a one-dimensional knowledge graph,
Mm-hmm.
usually a two-dimensional knowledge graph. And because I model, some people, how are you able to see everything? Well, yeah, because as a geographer, I've dealt with four-dimensional systems, creating a map of a whole city and data about all the buildings and all the addresses and all the transactions taking place. So it's a simple information system to link maybe 50 supply chain systems so that data could flow, so that missions can be accomplished. It's like, it's a walk in the park for me because of
I wonder, you know, I think we're
systems.
trained to think in that dot connecty way, but you know, when I've looked back and why I became a geographer, it was because I think I'm wired. You're wired that way. I don't think you really learn. It's been a frustration in my career, actually. I generally work with people that are very, even sort of more senior leaders. They're very detail focused. They're very detail. They centered a little backwards a little bit, and they're lost in the details. And I'm always looking above the details, and I find it frustrating that, can't you see this? You know, can't you see that the big picture pieces? And quite often I've worked in places where historically, where that's not the case, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just we think differently, and I think when you think like we think, it can be frustrating, feeling like you're surrounded by people lost in the details, and you want to say, let's just step above this for a little while and just think through the bigger picture and connect a few dots before we dive into the details. So I think geographers have a considerable value, which you've just beautifully expressed. But let's move along, because you said ecosystems and the fact we live in a world which is connected. It's a fully connected world that we live in. And we're really kind of recreating that world digitally, a connected world. But talk to me about integration. Talk to me about separate systems, bringing them together, the value of doing that, the kind of world of integration. Just go, and I know you've got some use cases, so
yeah.
just
So the
expand
world,
on that again.
the three-dimensional universe that we live in which space goes in one direction, is a very interesting universe. In that things happen in it, you know, people have lives in it, you know, and people have objectives in it, you know, and people have companies and concerns and issues to deal with and problems to solve and businesses to undertake. And so typically, you would find that a typical enterprise system, like a company, is made up of organizations. Those organizations are exchanging information, knowledge, wisdom to achieve objectives. And you then find that maybe at a particular point in time, an operation, one operation or two operations, you know, are set up to achieve a particular objective. But then the company, you know, a year later or 2 years later or 5 years later, they're competing in a competitive environment. You know, it's an ecosystem of businesses. They want to either match their competitors or have a couple of things that make the businesses unique to win the customers that they're trying to get to be a concern. And so they might appoint a CIO, chief information officer, to say, and somebody, you know, a new chief executive, and it might be, oh, we need to do things slightly differently. So what does that mean then? It means that we need to organize the organizational systems slightly different way to achieve the mandate and the missions we're trying to achieve. So it could be, for example, in case of, say, the National Aeronautics Space Administration in the US, it could be sending a man to the moon and back safely because President Kennedy is giving them a new mandate. So how do we achieve this? And this is then where somebody then comes in to architect an enterprise to achieve that mandate, to achieve that mission. And a lot of the systems that you need, yes, organizational systems, organizational design, but also technology capabilities, for example, and engineering capabilities to help you achieve that mandate and those missions. So that is where, you know, systems architects, systems engineers, and geographers are typical, because we understand the fundamental reality, tend to be very good systems engineers and systems architects, because we then go, okay, let me reorganize all these systems, you know, to achieve this new mandate. And then how do I show this to people? It's like map making. How do I illustrate this to people? What do I leave out when I'm speaking to this particular stakeholder? Or maybe sometimes I just want to write a list of components, and but to somebody I want to draw a detailed diagram of everything that's in the system. Or maybe I want to convince people to build parts of the system. Maybe I need to show them a city view so that they build one part of the system in a way it interoperates with the other part. So they need to, it's like in a city, if I'm saying, oh, build a transport network to do the last mile, I need to tell someone, oh, you know what, it needs to link into the regional spine, because the flow needs to be, look at the holistic system. So your building systems is typically mandates change all the times, missions change all the times, and we need to then actually reorganize systems, architect systems to enable companies, organizations, and people to achieve the new mandates and new objectives and missions they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And so talk to me about supply chain, Victor. That's one area that I thought really it captivated me in thinking about these things, because a supply chain are all these separate pieces, and often it's separate pieces of software, separate pieces of data, and it's all local. It starts here and ends here, and there's all these bits in between. But when we talk about integration, we're talking about connecting all those pieces together as one holistic view of what's actually happening in the supply chain. Just talk to me about supply chains and your thoughts about connecting these systems together to make one holistic system, so to speak.
Yeah, so they're called supply chains, but actually, I think the supply ecosystems, the supply networks, typically,
yeah,
of businesses, and businesses could be an individual. So historically, in the real world, anyway, people traded locally. Then you had, systems where people traded more globally, and you have things like the Silk Road, where products are moving all around the world because nobody produces everything. So you have local regions, parts of the world, maybe because of which is another geographical topic, because of their comparative advantage, because of environmental determinism, or because of policy, are good at making one thing or the other. So that as a society, as a kingdom, an empire, or a city, that the products and services they're good at and do better than everyone else. It could be making microchips, it could be making original equipments or components that go into a finished product. It could be services, which industrial geography is, a topic about, different types of industries and how they're organized. So these parts of all people making and producing goods, services, products, have to trade those products. In the past, that would have been, people, sending messages, someone that calls across the world, or fax or telegram or different types of messaging. But as we've gone into the more advanced information age, the velocity of those transactions need to be fast, and you need a system to enable these different actors in a value chain, which could be a local value chain, just like a local, or could be a regional value chain within the country, or could be a national value chain or supply chain. Value chains are typically that you're exchanging, you're creating services. The supply chain or supply network tends to imply that you're creating physical products. And so companies need an ecosystem, a platform to be able to exchange information, data, and knowledge, optimally, so that people know what somebody needs, but also to enable that commerce to happen. And like in the real world companies, in the real world geographical space that we occupy, but in the internet world, then, which all the companies use, or the digital world, each company has an equivalent digital location, for example. That could be a system that's maybe a system is connected through FTP, or secure file transfer protocol, or applicability statement to a system, or maybe an API, the system, it could be an ERP system, or line of business systems. All these systems have to be made to interoperate with each other, to be orchestrated, so that information is passed around optimally. And so you then get information is passing freely, flowing freely, and then real world activities like sales then take place, and then those products, if they're physical products, get shipped, if the digital products get downloaded, and all that data is captured. And then, that data can be used, can be analyzed to enable chief executives and C-level executives or different types of senior managers make better decisions to run their companies. But also, it could then be used as well as we go into the age of AI, for example. And you can put an AI on top of that, and it can help you, predict risks, potential shortfalls. And a lot of the time, that's a geospatial question, because we trade in the real world, we live in the real world. There's a large geospatial element to supply chains and global value chains. You're mute, Matt.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, human error. What I was saying that people couldn't hear me saying was, it's interesting to tie into the last conversation. So I spoke to Scott about data fusion, but we define the fact that spatial is the piece that connects all of that data. It's the common piece that connects the data. So if you're going to try and solve problems with this massive data, the spatial piece is the thing that connects that data together and what you kind of pull out of that thing. So it connects those dots. And I'll use that term again. But what I think you've just said there is, in a similar way, is spatial connects these systems as well. Like if we talk about supply chain and these separate pieces, I need to track this package from China to the US and know where it is and all the details of that. We historically have had like these separate systems that operate locally or however it is, doing specific things. But spatial is the thing that connects the dots here in the same way as the data. The systems, it's like the glue of what we're talking about here. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, spatial is because everything happens somewhere. Everything is somewhere. Everything happens somewhere. Everything, is somewhere at a certain time, and happens somewhere at a certain time. In the three-dimensional universe where time goes in one direction. But also, there's another space that's there in the current age that we inhabit. There's also the information space, which is a different space. It's a two-dimensional universe. That we often, people don't often know that it exists, or a one-dimensional universe, which is a knowledge, a universe of knowledge graphs. And that's the IT system space, which is, and that relates the join between the IT system space and the geospatial space is oftentimes that an equivalent physical object has its digital counterpart clone, a digital.
Yeah, that's that digital twin world that I look at and say, we've got the real world, and then we've got this digital world, which is a representation of reality, but a dynamic digital twin. It really, we live in a dynamic world, so we're recreating the world digitally, a dynamic version of that, and then we can do all sorts of things in the digital world, the information space, that we can't do in the real world. So it opens up these enormous possibilities. So that's kind of that tie-in, I think.
And the digital world is like similar to a cosmic web. It is a space of nodes and links. So it's a space of a three-dimensional universe. You have four nodes for a one-dimensional, just one node and x and y coordinates. Another node and x and y coordinates. A line joins them to two. That's one-dimensional. A line, and you have a two-dimensional, then you have you put four dots and you have four lines, you have a two-dimensional universe. And there's three. Now in the information A space, what you tend to see is that you have a node, a link, another node, two systems exchange information, two arrows, data is flowing to and fro. So that universe is very similar to a geospatial universe. If you looked at the topology of a road network, transportation network, that is basically what the information space looks like. And that space is quite interesting because geospatially, that's what, a knowledge graph. A lot of systems like LinkedIn, many other systems are based on that graph databases, that knowledge graph. And the join is typically that a physical location or a physical transaction in the geographical world might have a counterparty digital transaction, which is a link between link to a zero-dimensional object in the two-dimensional universe. So yeah, it's still geospatial, but it's a different kinds of space. But geographers probably are the best to understand the relationship between our three-dimensional, four-dimensional space to that two-dimensional space where data lives in.
Yeah, agreed. And we got lots of other things we could talk about here, Victor. So this potentially opens up another more than one interview. So I kind of wanted to close out on, as you were talking there, I was thinking, I think as an industry, the geospatial industries kind of remain this little, we say everything is connected. We live in a geospatial world. What does geospatial mean? Place on Earth is the translation of that, the geo and the spatial. I feel as though we live in a niche. The geospatial world is a niche. GIS is a niche. But I think that the way we've been thinking about things is slightly, I think we're missing the point that we think, I mean, I used to think this when I worked in the pure GIS world. What else can we do with a map? What else can we do with a map? That was my thinking. What else can we do with a map? What was I thinking? It has nothing to do with a map. It has much to do with the spatial connection, which involves people, places, and things. It's all connected. So if you think of it differently and you stop thinking about the map, you think something the data, you stop thinking about all the stuff that we've generally thought about, and you've thought, let me think what systems are geospatial, for example, that can be connected via geospatial. It's most systems. Most of the stuff we do is on the Earth, people, place, and things. Again, I've said it before, but so if we think about it differently, we think about industries, and most of them have a geospatial aspect to them. What are those industries, and what are they doing today that could be connected using spatial data, using connected systems, again, using that glow of spatial? The limit of what we can do is absolutely endless. There's no limit. It's so wide, but we kind of narrow our thinking. It's, we must do this, and it's about maps, and it's all this other stuff. It's actually not. It's about connecting dots, data dots, system dots, and having this one perspective, which is a geospatial perspective, this window into this very dynamic environment that we're living in. For example, supply chain. You got any closing thoughts on that?
I think the closing thought would be that nowadays, because of the internet and also because companies like Google, Microsoft through their big maps, S3 have been a bit successful nowadays with making the average person use a map every day in their lives. In the past, you probably don't use a map, say 30 years ago, and you're moving around London, for example, you might have a schematic map, which is a cartographic map of the city. It goes back to what I was talking about space. It's moving like a one-dimensional space map of the city, not reality, not drawn to. So many people, like used to speak to people that live in the city, and they will be narrating space like how they've traveled, and you tell me, this place is actually close to that place, but there's just a barrier that makes that you haven't really, no, it's not that close, it's really far away, until you bring a map. I'm like, oh really, I never knew. So the mental map of many people was based on the access to the reality that they had. And in the last, say, 20 years, you've seen most people, kids, exposed to seeing the actual reality. They know their city. They know what part of the city they live in, what part their grandma lives in, what part they go to school in. So that reality is obvious from they're learning spatial reality, spatial distribution, spatial from just everyday life. So that now means that actually nowadays those people like that are getting into the workplace, people like that are learning to build solutions. So the geographical things that were quite obvious to many people growing up 20, 30 years ago where people had mental maps of the world, and maybe in the mental map of the world, another country, the country next door, because it's maybe you can't get connected to the right flight or the roads, and maybe some countries historically have a war, and you can move to the other. So if other country looks nearer because you're always going there, all of that internal reality and consensus reality that was probably not the actual reality is beginning to fade away because people have exposed the actual reality, which is geography, more early in their lives. I think that's one of the biggest factor to people becoming more spatially literate. And nowadays we now lucky to live in a world where we have things like James Webb Space Telescope, the Hubble Space Telescope, that's also looking beyond Earth, and so people are getting that cosmospatial knowledge as well.
Yeah.
I think
Lovely.
it's a great time. It's a great time to be alive, to experience these things.
I love it, and that's a good place to finish on. That's fantastic. Wonderful conversation, Victor. Like I said, we've had so many good conversations, just you and me. And I said to you, I should talk to you so other people can share the sort of wisdom that you've got and your perspective on this stuff. So thanks for the conversation. One last question. If people have questions, how can they reach you?
So they can reach me via LinkedIn, and we can share the LinkedIn on the. Yeah, I'll send you my LinkedIn address. But you can reach me via LinkedIn. I'll be happy to have any more conversations about these topics.
Great, and I'll include a link to your LinkedIn profile in this interview. So that's great. So for today, Victor, thank you ever so much for the conversation. This opens up possibilities for future conversations between us that we'll do in a similar way. But for today, thanks for your time.
My pleasure, Matt.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Bye.